I will be refuting Lewis's speech on his claim was removing the undocumented immigrant population would have negative effects on the United States. He states his secondary claims as his first one is undergoing deportation procedures will cost the government billions. His second claim is deportation will affect the economy, and his third, it will affect the lives of the U.S. citizens. My response to his secondary claim one, the advocate claims that deporting 11 billion people will cost billions, and according to CBS News, the U.S. government spends about $7 million every minute. So deporting immigrants will not be much of a financial burden, making this argument somewhat weak. And the advocate did not mention the Immigration Enforcement 287G program, which was established in 1996, and this is basically local officers are trained to receive authority for immigration enforcement, and the funding comes from state and local law agencies. So the federal government isn't funding much of this. They do fund some of it, and according to William Kendall, who's an analyst in the immigration policy, in 2016, the federal funding for this was only about $24 million. So comparing this to the $400 billion, as stated by the opponent, this is a pretty big difference. And he also failed to mention that the benefits that immigrants are given by the government. So this is a loss of money. And according to the Heritage Foundation, in 2010, it was recorded that illegal immigrants receive about $24,000 a year in government benefits and services. So this is pretty much education and police and fire services, while they only pay about $10,000 in taxes, and this is per household, resulting in a loss for the government. He also states that 4.5 million children may end up in immediate foster care with cost of $26,000 a year if their parents are deported, which does support his claim, but then he goes on to say that most of the children will end up going with their parents out of the country, so he directly contradicts his claim. And my response to his secondary claim, which was deportation will affect the economy. I found this claim to be really unclear because he doesn't really state if this is a good thing or a bad thing. He kind of just says that it will affect the economy. And he also says removing the immigrants will remove about 6% of the workforce. So again, he doesn't state his position of whether this is a good or bad thing. So this would actually create jobs for the unskilled and uneducated Americans who do need these jobs. And according to Stephen Camarota, who's the director of research at the Center for Immigration, study says that since 2007, all of the net employment gains have gone to immigrants. He says that as of 2015, 1.5 million more Americans are unemployed, whereas 2 million more immigrants are employed. So this shows how immigrants are getting higher rates of employment compared to the actual Americans. And a professor at Harvard University, George Barra, says that when the supply of workers goes up, the price that firms have to pay goes down. So an example of when this happened is in 2006. A chicken processing plant in Georgia was raided by immigration agents, and 75% of their workers were immigrants, and they ended up being vanished. And so the result of this, the company later then posted ads in the newspaper for those jobs available, and the pay was much higher than it was originally that they were paying the immigrants. And my response to his third claim, which was U.S. citizens will be affected, the advocate claims that they'll be affected, but the evidence that he provides is irrelevant to the topic. So he mentions a study that pretty much talks about kids who have less of a chance at education who are in unstable homes. And he relates this to immigration, but I looked into the article and it pretty much doesn't say anything about immigration. It's more about families who are divorced or have many problems in the home. So that pretty much makes that evidence weak. And he does claim that children's futures are jeopardized because they may end up going back with their parents. And an alternative to this claim is that policies can be implemented to specifically protect the children of undocumented parents by ensuring that before resulting to foster care, they try to place the child with a stable family member. That way they don't have to go back with their parents and they still have a chance at a brighter future here in America. Thank you.
All right, the structural stuff starts off pretty well. On the first point, you mentioned this specific program, for instance, where local law enforcement officers can become part of the process. And then it seems like you were transferring that and suggesting that that would replace the need to spend any money deporting people. That seems like a huge inferential leap, that we can do this with the $24 million that is being provided to the local law enforcement to do those kinds of things. I don't understand why that argument is as responsive to this point as you think it is. It's not that it doesn't apply, but I do think that you're making some big inferences based on what seems like it's a fairly vague program to begin with. I did think that your argument suggesting that there's a cost trade-off, that was sort of the thing that we were mentioning in the previous speaker, that's one of the reasons why we want to look at those kinds of issues, and that there is an economic impact, but the economic impact is in the other direction. I thought that was a reasonable argument to be making and applying, although it might have applied more on the second point. On the second point, I thought you did a pretty good job talking about the employment trade-offs that we get, and I thought the statistical information that you presented on the loss of net jobs, or that all net jobs are basically going to immigrants instead of Native American citizens, or native-born citizens, I should say, Native American citizens. And I like the example that you had about the price increase, which suggests also that wages are being held down by people who are here undocumented and working for lower prices, and that prevents people who are willing to work from getting the jobs at a better price. That seems like it's an economic negative consequence as well, and probably could use a little bit more discussion on that. Your third point, or the advocate's third point, in your response to it, I think you do have a legitimate point that the evidence is not specific to any immigration issues. However, I would assume that removing the parents from a family would be pretty much creating instability, and that is a link to the harms that the advocate's talking about. Your answer is to suggest that there might be solutions to that, and I think that that's quite possible. One of the things that might be interesting to see is what kinds of consequences have there been to people who have done exactly what you've described, gone back with their families to wherever it was that the family originated from, and has there been a negative consequence to them? We don't have any data on that sort of thing. There seems to be an assumption that it's automatically better one place than another, and I think that that's a challenge that both sides need to be able to develop information on.